Okay, once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Lisa Moycombo from the Challenge Initiative, and we'd like to kick off this webinar. As you may know, this is actually our fifth webinar in an AYSRH office hours series of webinars. And just for some background, the Challenge Initiative, TCI, is a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded initiative that aims to sustainably scale up evidence-based approaches to increase use of modern contraceptive methods among all women 15 to 49 years of age in urban poor areas. This includes a special focus on empowering young women by improving their knowledge and attitudes about contraceptives, improving their self-efficacy to use and access contraceptives, and creating an enabling environment that allows them to freely obtain informed choice contraceptive services. As I mentioned, this webinar is our fifth in a series of webinars, and the overall plan for these webinars came from the fact that we know one-off trainings aren't sufficient. So we view these webinars as kind of ongoing continuing education around these important topics. And this webinar that we are hosting today with Rutgers and Kenya SRHR Alliance will focus on insights on the institutionalization and measurement of meaningful youth engagement from Rutgers, an international center of expertise on sexual and reproductive health and rights based in the Netherlands. And their colleagues, Judy, Amina at Kenya SRHR Alliance. So today's speakers, you will hear from three speakers. Anna Page is a research monitoring and evaluation advisor at Rutgers. Throughout her career, Anna has focused on the meaningful engagement of young people and excluded adults in research advocacy and programs. Anna's current work includes supporting youth researchers and youth voices, a participatory qualitative study in Indonesia exploring young people's sexual and reproductive health. Anna's previous experience includes leading participatory youth research in Kenya and supporting young people to advocate for better mental health services in the UK. Rosaline Both is the operational research coordinator for the Get Up, Speak Out program at Rutgers. Her PhD research focused on young people's use of sexual and reproductive health technologies, including emergency contraceptives in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Rosaline has also worked on livelihood and HIV-related research and intervention designs in Ethiopia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Her current work includes working together with young researchers on several SRHR-related research projects. This meaningful youth participation is a key component of Rutgers' work. The organization has a strong track record. That is true. But I messed up my notes, my apologies. Now I'd like to introduce Judy Amina. She is the Youth Country Coordinator for the Kenya Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Alliance. She works to ensure that young people are meaningfully engaged and involved at all levels and in different areas. Previously, Judy worked at the National Empowerment Network of People Infected and Affected by HIV in Kenya, where she coordinated the youth activities, acting as a liaison between the organization and networks of young people working with them. So thanks in advance to our speakers. I wanted to just go over the logistics very quickly for this webinar. So each presenter will have about 15 minutes. We ask that those who have questions, if you can please type them in the Q&A box at the top of your screen. We'll manage those questions first at the end of the three presentations. And as many of those as we can, we'll go through. Those that we can't, we will save and we will try to provide written responses if at all possible with the audio recording, which will be sent out in a day or two at the end of the webinar. So there will be an audio recording and the PDF version of the slides in both English and French that will go out after the webinar in a day or two. Also, as I mentioned previously, in a way to ensure our Francophone West African colleagues have a chance to participate and learn from Rutgers and Kenya SRHR Alliance, IntraHealth, a TCI partner, is helping us to test out simultaneous interpretation. So for those who would rather follow in French, please follow the instructions on the screen and find the French translated slides in the chat box. So now I'd like to turn over the controls to Anna.
Thank you very much. Just checking I can control this. There we go. Oops.
Sorry, you have it. I'm just trying to mute myself.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, forget it. I'll be quiet.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Anna Page, and I'm going to kick off this presentation on behalf of Rutgers. I will talk about what is meaningful youth engagement, why we do it, and why we measure it. And then a little bit of an introduction on how at Rutgers we measure meaningful youth engagement in general. And then I will hand over to first Rosalind and then Judy to talk about the Get Up, Speak Out, the CUSO program. So first of all, what is meaningful youth engagement? Meaningful youth engagement is when young people are empowered to take an active role in decision-making affecting their lives. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the Choice Flower of Participation, which is developed by Choice for Youth and Sexuality, a Dutch youth-led organization. And what this excellent diagram illustrates is that meaningful youth engagement can take many forms. It might be hard to read, and a link to the full document is provided at the end. But for now, I just wanted to illustrate that youth engagement can be meaningful if it's youth-led, when young people have all the decision-making power. But it can also be meaningful if decision-making is shared with adults in various levels. And it's important to recognize that meaningful youth engagement can be realized at different levels within an organization, but also that different types of youth engagement will be more suitable and possible at different stages within a program, and that all these different forms are okay. But why do we engage young people at all? Well, at Rutgers, like many other organizations working on sexual and reproductive health and rights, rights-based approaches are central to our work. And one of those rights is children's right to participate in matters that concern them. And that is enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We see young people as being experts in their own needs and lives. And we, for a long time, had an assumption that not only does youth engagement have an empowering effect on young people themselves, but it also increases program reach and effectiveness. And actually, we're really starting to build more and more evidence about this really being true. But why do we measure it? Well, we want to include youth engagement in our programs for these reasons. And if we are going to do that in an evidence-based way for ourselves and to provide advice to other people on doing this, we need to understand what works, what are the barriers to youth engagement, and what are the solutions. And also to use this evidence and understanding to inform the capacity strengthening that we provide to young people themselves to support their engagement, and also to other organizations and our partners who we're supporting to involve young people. So how do we measure and learn about and improve youth engagement? Well, I think it's important here to note that this is not something that we've just suddenly been able to do. At Rutgers, we've been working on meaningful youth engagement since around about 2008, when we started to include it in our programs. And it's been a real trajectory, an iterative process to improve not only the youth engagement we've been doing, but also the ways we measure it. And yeah, that's been a very iterative process. The more we've understood, the more we've been able to improve it. So from about from programs in 2008 to 2010, that's when we first were including it. And in 2010, in the external evaluations at the end, we included questions about youth engagement in the central questions of those external evaluations. And they provided really useful insights on how youth engagement was working and some of the barriers for it to be better. For example, power structures between young people and older staff members in organizations where we were trying to engage young people. And they gave us really valuable lessons, so that in the next round of programming, we were able to include operational research within the planning. And I'm actually going to give you an example of that operational research in a minute. The next stage after that was to actually integrate youth engagement into the monitoring and evaluation indicator framework. So also, as I will outline later, we have specific output, outcome and process indicators on youth engagement and included youth engagement in the reporting formats, which really helps partners to keep in mind, to think about how well are they doing youth engagement throughout the program. We also, in all programs, have regularly had sharing and learning meetings, both within countries and between countries. And particularly between countries can be very useful to look at, even in very different contexts, often the challenges are the same or very similar, and we can share information about how to overcome them. And then, of course, informal feedback throughout the program. So as I mentioned, I was going to give an example of operational research. So in 2011, Rutgers carried out operational research on meaningful youth participation within the Access, Services and Knowledge program, ASK program, in 5 countries with 26 partner organizations. In the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see the Explore toolkit. This was developed by Rutgers as a guide for ourselves, but also for others, on how we engage young people in monitoring, evaluation, and research. And we use this toolkit as a basis for our own research, where a professional researcher worked with teams of young people in 5 countries. And this is, I think, the Indonesian team in the picture. And they went out to interview young people and adults in their own countries to find out answers to the research questions on the right of this slide, looking at how young people are structurally involved and what makes the engagement meaningful for them, and many other questions. I haven't got time to go into the full results of that research, but at the end of this presentation, there are links to the research reports and an academic article about this research, where we talk about the findings, but also the method. Oops, sorry. And then the findings from the operational research in the ASK program were fed directly into the Get Up, Speak Out program, which came immediately after the ASK program. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Rosaline, who will explain more about what we did in CUSO.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. We now want to share our experience with how we integrate MYE into one of our programs, the Get Up, Speak Out program. And for the Get Up, Speak Out program, or CUSO, we drew on learning from previous programs on how to integrate MYE in a more systematic manner. So that means that in CUSO, we measure MYE through, first of all, making MYE a dedicated outcome area in the theory of change. We also have MYE indicators in the MNE framework. We measure the progress that we make with MYE through a baseline and endline evaluation. And we continued with doing operational research on MYE. And it is important to mention that young people are systematically involved in the measurement of MYE. For example, the Youth Country Coordinators, or YCCs, they provide the reporting data on MYE, and they also recently led the end evaluation on MYE. Yeah, so let me start with briefly introducing the CUSO program. CUSO is a 5-year program developed by a consortium consisting of SRHR NGOs in the Netherlands and the UK, working together with networks of SRHR CSOs, so-called SRHR alliances, in 7 countries in Africa and Asia. The program is financed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the change that the CUSO program envisions is that all young people, especially girls and young women, are empowered to realize their SRHR in societies that take a positive stance towards young people's sexuality. CUSO uses a multi-component approach and addresses a multitude of factors and actors in influencing young people's SRHR. The theory of change of the program describes 5 interrelated outcomes that contribute towards this goal. And what you can see on this slide, if you look at the bottom left, is that one of the 5 outcome areas is dedicated to MYE. Yeah. So here we have a visualization of the theory of change of the CUSO program. I am aware of the fact that the text inside the visual is not readable, and it's also not needed to read it all. But what we want to point out with this visual is that inside the red circle, you can see how the intermediate outcomes, an outcome around MYE contributes to the long-term objective of the program. And this visual also shows the strategies that we use to structurally empower and engage young people in all layers of programming and decision-making. So these strategies are, first of all, capacity building of young people, and then building youth-adult partnerships. And the YCC is one such youth-adult partnership. Another strategy is networking and movement building. And finally, youth involvement in advocacy. So here we have the indicators from the MNE framework that were developed to measure the outcomes and outputs of the CUSO MYE interventions. So as you can see here, there are output indicators that focus on the level of youth representation in structures and decision-making processes, and an output indicator on the number of collaborations between young people from different partner organizations. We also have outcome indicators. They focus on the extent to which young people increasingly feel supported by adults, and on the extent to which young people increasingly feel that they can contribute to changes. Finally, we developed process questions that ask for narrative examples around, first of all, how partners ensure that there is a constant flow of young people trained and engaged in decision-making processes. Also on strategies that partners use to strengthen youth movements or youth collaborations. And finally, a process question on strategies used to make sure that a variety of young people is engaged. And the table on this slide shows how the MYE output indicators are reported on in the CUSO annual report. It is important to mention that partners set their own targets on MYE because they come from different starting points. For example, we have youth-led organizations among the partners, and we have organizations that were not so much used yet to working with young people. Partners report twice a year on their progress on MYE output indicators. And this reporting tool is very useful to hold organizations to account and to provide quantitative data. And the output indicators, they provide great insight into levels of participation, but they say less about engagement. For example, from the numbers reported under the output indicators, we do not know in what kinds of structures or decision-making processes young people are involved. For example, whether these are national steering committees or whether it concerns decision-making at activity level. So it is important to use other methods to measure as well, including qualitative reporting. And here we see how, on an annual basis, partners also provide narrative reports on the process questions on MYE. In this narrative, and we don't expect you to read it completely, but you will find here specific examples of structures and decision-making processes that young people are involved in. And these narratives form part of the annual report that Rutgers submits to the donor. At the start and at the end of the CUSO program, we conducted a baseline and endline evaluation of the outcome area that is dedicated to MYE. And this baseline and endline was specifically focused on the MYE outcome area. The baseline evaluation was conducted in 2017, and the endline evaluation was conducted a few months ago. And we are in the middle of analyzing the findings of this endline. The goals of the baseline and the endline measurement are to help shape and support improvement processes related to MYE, to understand where and when and how we want to invest in MYE, so to make programmatic choices, and also to contribute to current discussions about MYE, also outside CUSO, with both practitioners and academics. For example, we also publish academic articles on MYE. So for this baseline and endline survey, we used mixed methods, existing of a survey and focus group discussions. With regards to the survey, for the baseline and endline together, 458 young people from the 7 countries participated. They all completed the survey either online, or if they were in a more remote area, they completed it offline using a hard copy. The survey consisted of 22 questions, focusing on the experiences and opinions of young people related to the support they receive from adults, on the relationship between adults and young people, and also on how young people participate. And then we had focus group discussions. And with regards to those, for the baseline and endline together, we conducted more than 50 focus group discussions divided over the 7 CUSO countries. It is important to mention that all the young people participating in the survey and focus group discussions were involved in the CUSO program. And it's also important to mention that especially at the endline evaluation, the youth country coordinators, they had a leading role. Here you see the baseline and endline results of one survey question. And this question was about young people being asked in which aspects of CUSO interventions they were involved. What you see is that the blue and the red bars, they indicate that they were always or often involved in that specific aspect. If we look at the first row, design, fortunately, we see that the number of young people reporting to be involved in design of interventions has increased. A little over 16% said at baseline that they are often involved in design, and this has now increased to a little over 18% at endline. and 25% of young people felt that they are always involved in the design at baseline, and this has now increased to more than 29%. So for most of the rows, we see positive increases in young people's engagement. At the same time, it also shows that some aspects, such as budgeting and also design to a certain extent, that they are staying behind. And here you can see another example of a survey question. I will not discuss this question further. The survey tool that we developed is not yet available online, but we are very happy to share a copy with you if you contact us after the webinar, and our contact details will be made available at the end of the webinar. So this survey that we used, this tool, has proven to be successful in reaching a wide range of young people, also young people in more remote CUSO implementation areas, and in providing them with a platform to voice their opinions and to share their experiences. And it also was successful in providing concrete numbers on MYE areas that need further improvement or attention. But the survey tool is less successful in unpacking the broader issues behind some of the survey findings, and also in explaining the differences between the baseline and the endline findings. So this is why we also used the focus group discussions. The questions used in the focus group discussions covered more or less the same topics as the survey tool, but we used probing techniques as well as asking respondents for examples to unpack the stories behind the percentages. In the example of this slide, you can see that we saw an impressive increase in the survey results that came from Malawi in about how young people feel that they are involved in decision-making power. We saw an increase from 57% at baseline to 77% at the end line. Then with the focus group discussions, we found that although this is still an impressive increase, that the decision-making power increased mostly with regards to youth-centered activities. And that in other areas, their decision-making power remains limited. This means that there are still some barriers to overcome in fully institutionalizing young people's engagement in decision-making. I now gladly hand over to Judy, who will speak about her experience with MYE in Kenya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Amina from the Kenya SRHR Alliance. And as Rosa had mentioned, the CUSO program is implemented in 7 different countries. And in all these 7 countries, they work with youth country coordinators from the 7 countries. And the main role of the youth country coordinators is to ensure that there is effective and efficient, meaningful youth engagement. And the youth country coordinators are able to learn from each other and adopt best practices from each other based on their different country experiences and successes. Specifically in Kenya, the youth country coordinator has been able to provide guidance to 17 alliance members on achieving meaningful youth engagement. And this has also been done with the support from a youth council, which was set up in 2018 after recommendations from young people during a baseline research on meaningful youth engagement. Last year in 2019, the youth country coordinator in Kenya was able to take lead in conducting the endline research on meaningful youth engagement. And this was done with support of 2 other research assistants. Here are just a few of the youth country coordinators from the different countries. So specifically for the Kenya Meaningful Youth Engagement endline measurement, We are looking to investigate how empowered young people feel to contribute to changes on the target group, of which CUSO targets, and the social environment in which the program operates. Specifically, the research was able to reach 74 young people, and of these 74, 38 of them were took part in the survey, filling in an online survey, and 36 of them took part in 4 focus group discussions. The survey and FGD aimed at young people who are actively involved in the CUSO program, not only as beneficiaries, but those who are actually working in the program as program officers, program managers, volunteers, interns, peer educators, youth advocates, and much more. In Kenya specifically, we measured the involvement of young people in the program, their freedom of choice for the program, whether they are able to participate, they can choose whether to participate in an activity or not, or whether to take part in the program or not, their empowerment at both societal and individual levels, whether they have decision-making powers at the organizations, and if the decisions that they make are actually taken up or actually listened to, and the interactions with adults in the organizations, because we believe that a healthy youth-adult partnership contributes to meeting the organizational or the program objectives and goals. For the end line, we had more young people who were involved in the measurement compared to the baseline. And this we attribute to the fact that CUSO has not been able to work with more young people, and therefore more young people are willing to participate in the program. More young people are also able to interact with the different aspects of the CUSO program and expressing interest to learn from each other. And that is because that they've also been involved in the program, so they understand the different levels and where they're actually involved and where they would want to be involved more. From gathering data from the young people, a few things, we were able to see a few things, and part of it is that young people were able to openly share their opinions, their stories, and their experiences working in their own organizations and in the community. This is mainly contributed to the fact that we worked with research assistants who were their peers and worked in the CUSO program. So they understand the situations that the young people are working in, and they understand their context. The respondents, many of the respondents, half of them, had also a very good grasp of the information from the organization regarding sexual reproductive health and rights, thus giving quality data. This further shows that when young people are actually involved and they get information on the different aspects of the program or the organization, they are also able to meaningfully provide data, or they can be meaningfully engaged in research. The respondents also showed more openness in finding opportunities amongst themselves. As we know, young people also have different, they may be working in different areas aside from the specific organizations they are in. Therefore, we could see the openness and the willingness of the young people to want to learn from one another and to collaborate in building movements of young people to improve their sexual and reproductive health. From the data that young people provided, we could see that they are more willing to speak about reproductive health issues in their own communities and with their peers. And therefore, engaging them gave them the confidence to be able to speak to each other and to speak in their societies. So from the findings that were got from the endline research on meaningful youth engagement, in Kenya, they were presented to the members of the Kenya SRHR Alliance, and the recommendations proposed by the young people were also discussed and put into consideration for the work plan for 2020. This shows a step with the young people being able to reach some of the objectives that they put for themselves, and also shows us steps forward with the organizations willing to take up the recommendations from the young people. Specifically in Kenya, the young people had requested to have more refresher trainings on meaningful youth participations, And this was also included in the work plan. So this year, they'll be able to get more trainings. So they're able to grasp the reason, or they're able to grasp more on meaningful youth engagement and how it can be achieved in the organizations. Additionally, the partners committed to creating exit plans for young people, because as you work with young people, you know there are high attrition rates, and young people are also exiting and going into different directions. Therefore, to manage expectations between the young people and the young people and the organizations, having exit plans that are tailored to the different young people and organizational structures will be able to help maintain that. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists, especially given the different levels of complication with trying to test out a new feature of simultaneous translation. I appreciate immensely your willingness to kind of be our guinea pig in trying this out. For those who weren't able to follow along in French but wanted to, don't fear. We understand that some may not have seen the language switch, so we'll send out a recording in French as well as the English recording when we are ready. I just wanted to note that our presenters provided this great list of resources that they had referred to in their presentations, along with offering to provide in the example of the tool that they have worked with that's not available online yet. So when you receive the slides, you'll be able to have these links. And the presenters' email addresses are all available here. And now we'll go to the Q&A. Okay. So the first question is, can you please talk about benefits that you've identified, if any, to adults and to organizational cultures from the strategies and practices of youth engagement? Specifically, I think it was highlighted in all three, the importance of youth-adult participation.
Can we suggest that Judy takes the first answer on this as someone with direct experience in Kenya?
Okay, that is fine. So I can already identify a few of the benefits of having young people working together with adults. So specifically in the Kenya CUSO, in the Kenya Alliance, young people working together with the adults has shown of the program. So having youth adult partnerships has shared responsibilities between the adults and the young people. Therefore, there's more understanding between the adults and the young people on what is expected and what is actually to be achieved. So you can see ownership with the young people as well for the program, seeing that they can make decisions in the program, that they can also choose where to participate and where not to participate, and where their capacity is and not where their capacity is not. So there are more realistic expectations between the adults and the young people. And aside from that, there's support between the adults and the young people when that understanding is met. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Judy. Can we also just wanted to add from the Rutgers side that what we see in CUSO, but also in other programs, is that by involving young people, we can make the programs more responsive and relevant to young people themselves, and that young people are able to push the agenda of young people's needs and things that they think are important within the program and also more broadly outside the program.
Thank you. And do you think that the indicators that you presented on meaningful youth engagement, I think it was outcome 2, are these markers applicable to other health areas beyond SRH, for example, mental health?
I would say yes, probably not directly, because as with any program, you would need to assess what are the aims of the program and what are we trying to achieve with the program, and what are the changes we're trying to see, and how could we evidence them? So it would depend on the program, but in principle, if the mental health program was aiming, was seeing the involvement of young people in decision-making structures as a key method by which that program was aiming to achieve its mental health aims, then yes, they would be relevant. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, that does. The importance of adapting to the actual project goals, the indicators. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly, yeah.
And then another question I think that came up in the Q&A as well as the chat box is, can you mention the 7 countries that took part in CUSO, as well as the age range when you talk about youth? So Judy mentioned in her slides, I believe it was 18 to 26-year-old youth. Is that the same age range across the 7 countries, and what were the 7 countries?
Okay, yeah, I can respond to that. I apologize for not mentioning the 7 countries specifically. The 7 countries are 2 countries in Asia, Indonesia and Pakistan, and then 5 countries in Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, and Malawi. And the age range is young people between the ages of 10 to 24. In some countries, we go slightly over 24 because they're still considered as youth. So maybe to 27 but that is the age range.
Great, thank you so much. And then what challenges did the project encounter as the project moved along its known trajectory? So the questions assume that the project moved along kind of the plan, natural path, even intensity. And so just wondering if there were any challenges to the design.
Well, I assume we're talking about challenges within the Meaningful Youth Engagement part of the program, because it's quite a large program. So we'll just limit our answer to that. I mentioned when I was talking about my slide about the different types of ways we measure, that when we first included an evaluation of youth engagement in 2010, that power dynamics between young people and adults came up as a key challenge. And that is something that definitely has not gone away. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in meaningful youth engagement in any context, is helping adults who might not be used to working with young people to understand how you can meaningfully work with young people, and also to recognize and value the benefit that working with young people can bring. Working with young people in a meaningfully engaged way does require adults who are used to working in adult organizations to change their way of thinking and working. And that is why we, as Rutgers, include capacity building for organizations and adult staff, as well as young people, as a key strategy. So that's definitely an ongoing challenge. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that, and I think it would be nice to hear from Judy as well about what is happening in Kenya. I think one of the challenges remains that although we see really an increase in all of the countries in that youth are more and more involved in decision-making processes, that it is still often more young people being involved in the activities themselves, in implementation, in advocacy. But as I also showed, we still need to take some hurdles when it comes to budgeting and design, for example. And I think one other challenge that I would like to mention is that we made a specific outcome area for MYE. And I think that really worked well, and it's important. At the same time, that also sometimes we see that then this outcome area is given to the young people. So and there will be less sometimes working together between adults and young people on this. And maybe Judy, can you add something from Kenya?
Yeah, so
Judy, can you speak up just a little bit? Your audio is a little far.
okay, so maybe
Perfect,
from
thank
Kenya. Yeah. From Kenya, we can also see.
Oh, it went away again. Can you get a little closer?
I hope this is more audible.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So from Kenya, we can see also some challenges when it comes to decision making. There's sometimes a disconnect with the decision-making processes because everyone would assume that decision-making is only at the highest structures, that is in the board and sorts. However, there's also other areas of decision-making, including making decision on activity implementation and the other areas and aspects of the program. So that is something that you're also looking at maybe creating or closing the gap, ensuring that young people are able to make decisions not only at the top areas, but at all levels of the program implementation. Another challenge that we've also been able to see is that young people, as I had mentioned earlier in my slides, young people are always exiting to something different. Young people are going to school, young people are also working in different other areas, and therefore there's a higher attrition rates, meaning young people would exit, they'll be in the program for 1 year, 2 years, and exit to something different. And for this reason, that's why we saw a recommendation of having at least the organization have exit plans whereby they can meet the expectations between both the adults and the young people, and that they can know the young people are able to be with the organization for a certain period of time, and whether after, and what is expected after being part of that organization, and what is also able to come from them, not only from being volunteers or interns, but also being part of the program implementation as program officers and so on. So that is just a bit of the challenges we are having in Kenya.
Thank you so much, Judy. That's really helpful. And I now have about 3 questions related specifically to kind of the data collection efforts related to meaningful youth engagement. So one is an interesting question related to, are you aware of any research that links meaningful youth engagement levels with outcomes such as health or agribusiness, or compares meaningfully youth engaged programs versus non-meaningfully engaged programs and outcomes? Given this is somewhat nascent of an area, I guess the question is, are there any of that type of research that you're aware of currently exists?
Thank you for that question. That's not actually something that we have, we haven't got any evidence on that at the moment. But I'd like to hand over to my colleague Miranda van Rooijwijk, who is here with us also, who's also worked on this.
Hello, nice to meet you all. In the operational research that we did on the ASK program, we looked at meaningful youth engagement, but we also looked at how young people and youth engagement contributed to program effectiveness. Because we did have a fantastic end evaluation of that program. So we reached many of our objectives, including increased access to contraception and services, etc., etc. And we knew, of course, that that was largely due to the young people who were engaged in our program and actually really doing many of the activities too. So, but the challenge, scientifically seen, to link those two is very complex, to make that a very hard kind of causal connection. So what we did was, in the operational research, really look at what we could say about meaningful youth engagement, and trying to make sure that we attributed the results from the evaluation to the processes of meaningful youth engagement. That is how far we got with kind of building the evidence of impact of meaningful youth engagement on program outcomes. I hope this is somehow answering the question a bit. And you can read more in the article that we published on it. It's the first reference in the end slide.
Great, thank you. And I just put that slide back on. So I hope that, thank you very much, Miranda. That's very helpful. And this is also an interesting point that a few participants mentioned, in the sense of, because you have surveyed youth that have been actively involved in CUSO programs, does that bring in a bias of kind of the empowered youth in your findings? So to the extent, meaning, is this then reliable findings that can be replicated in other programs?
Thank you for this question. Well, we really aimed to include young people that were involved in the Get Up, Speak Out program, but we really made an effort to include as many young people as possible, also by going to the more remote areas where CUSO is being implemented. So the survey was online, but what we did is that the youth country coordinators, for the young people who were less easily being reached, they would give them a go there. They actually went there and gave them hard copies of the survey, and they filled it in, and then the youth country coordinator entered those findings online. So it's true that, yeah, our aim was to include young people involved in the CUSO program. So of course they have received training, they are maybe somewhat empowered, but we did make an effort to include a great variety of young people.
That is very helpful. And kind of along those same lines, so not knowing the full extent of all the different programming kind of elements related to CUSO, I guess the question is specifically around the measurement piece and data collection. How sustainable in your experience is collecting data along these indicators, especially in this mixed method approach? Like, did that require, like, would that be easily incorporated into other programs that you're working in?
Well, I think yes, basically, but I think a key point around the importance is about the importance of including meaningful youth engagement in your theory of change. So if you include the from the very moment of the project conceptualization, if you include meaningful youth engagement in that, then that's basically where the money comes from. So if you, and what is really needed is to include kind of lines of accountability, and with that comes funding, and with funding comes resources and time in which you can measure it, and that makes it sustainable, if that makes sense. So it's just, and we think these are sustainable in that we've presented actually many different ways that you can measure. So we including the outcome indicators, they were not actually a huge amount of time for people to count those moments of engagement, and they were actually a very small part of the annual reporting that partners were including. So they're sustainable in those kind of terms. If a project had a smaller budget and they did not include, for example, either the survey or the focus groups, there might be other ways to do smaller kinds of evaluation that were more affordable within that program. So I think it's really about being flexible, but also having that systematic inclusion of indicators around youth engagement.
Great, thank you. And in terms of, so you presented a slide on a few examples of indicators, but it looked like, so yeah, this related to outcome too. So if we went to the full report, would we be able to see indicators across the 5 different outcomes?
Yes, definitely. So the pink table that we just presented is
Yes.
only, so this is the outcomes only for outcome area 2.
Right.
So each of the other outcome areas have their own output, outcome, and process indicators.
Okay, and that would be, we could find the full, all of them in the resource.
I would need to check on
Okay.
if I'm not sure whether we have published a full indicator framework.
Oh, okay.
This was just presenting the indicators that we used in the outcome area 2.
Okay. Okay, that might be helpful. Another kind of series of related questions that I'm seeing are related to gender. So I'm curious as to the considerations of gender, how gender has been introduced or considered in strategies of promoting meaningful youth engagement. If it hasn't, what might be your thoughts on considerations around gender to be taken into account when working towards meaningful youth engagement? And that was kind of followed up by another participant saying, is the data on meaningful youth engagement disaggregated by gender? So we saw, at least in Judy's slides, that it was noted in terms of at least who responded or participated in the surveys and focus group discussions, but is part of the analysis also take that into consideration?
So we, of course, yes, we consider gender within all of our works, obviously a very important aspect within our work. In terms of youth, of how we engage young people, we aim for equal participation of young men and young women in all our programs and in the youth engagement itself. And of course, in order to achieve that, we recognize that we might need to look at particular enabling factors or barriers to those young people, but they have to be country specific. So I'd like to actually hand that over to Judy in just a second, but also to answer about the data. Yes, it is disaggregated by gender. Yeah, so, and that's part of the analysis. But Judy, perhaps you could say something about how do we consider, how do we respond to gender within youth engagement in Kenya?
Yeah, so for Kenya, we are also deliberate in having representation of all genders in the CUSO program in Kenya. And as for the research, you can also see, I'm sure we were not able to see from the baseline. However, there's also been an increase in the involvement of both. In the baseline, we had more young people who are men who are taking part in the research. And right now we have young people who are also both male and female, and the number is almost equal. So we are deliberate in involving all genders in the CUSO program. And even when it came to the research, we also deliberate in reaching for young people who are young people of both genders or all genders to ensure that we also get the input and contribution of all the young people. So from the involvement to the research and all the work that is done in the CUSO program, we have equal representation of all genders.
Thank you very much. I think this will be our last question for now, but one that I think is a mix between programming as well as monitoring and evaluation. But do you have any recommendations for how to better involve or meaningfully engage youth when youth participation has been quite low?
Maybe I could start.
That would be great. Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, so what we have seen work in Kenya is actually youth-adult partnerships because we initially had trainings on meaningful youth engagement in our alliances. And what we are able to see is that there's already stereotypes about young people working in organizations. So young people have stereotypes of adults and adults have stereotypes of young people. However, the stereotypes are not usually true. And these stereotypes create a barrier for young people and adults to work together in a healthy partnership. Therefore, having to address or trying to address these stereotypes and issues of young people and adults working together has been able to improve our meaningful youth engagement in the Alliance. Therefore, the adults and the young people are able to see both their expectation and give each other a chance in the implementation of these programs. And at the end, we can see confidence with the adults and also levels of trust improving between the adults and the young people. So what I would recommend is having a healthy youth-adult partnership and being open to working together.
Thank you, Judy. Rutgers colleagues, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Hello, this is Miranda speaking. Maybe two additional ways of encouraging organizations that just start with meaningful youth engagement to do well. One is if you work in partnerships and with a number of organizations, and we do in the alliances, it is very useful to do that and to have organizations that set a really good example, so that organizations that are just starting see how other organizations are engaging young people and engaging them in a meaningful way, but also so that they don't have to discover and find out how that works themselves. And so you don't need as much time to build trust within those organizations, because they see that others are trusting young people and that young people are doing a good job. The other example that we used back in 2008 was to work with young people through research and engage them as co-researchers. So where they had not yet a very meaningful role in decision-making, by engaging them as co-researchers, and we could do that because we were the ones that were assigning the researchers. And so we assigned the research, but then we made the task for the professional researcher to include young people and train them up as researchers, and then engage those young researchers in disseminating the findings and being part of the discussion about what these findings mean for programs. And by building and facilitating the discussion like that, it was more organic for those young researchers to then also become part and parcel of the program design, program implementation, and more of the higher level decision making, because they could show that they knew what they were talking about. The research gave them a position of power, so to speak. So these are a couple of things you can do as an organization to enhance meaningful youth engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all the insights from Rutgers and Kenya SRHR Alliance. We really appreciate your time today and all the efforts to share with us your experiences, as well as all the reference materials. There have been an overwhelming number of participants, so we appreciate everyone's time this morning, afternoon, and evening. And we will collect the questions. We tried to pick kind of those questions that were somewhat repetitive or similar to others, but we know we couldn't get to all of them. So we will collect those and share those with the presenters and see if we're able to kind of come up with some responses. And we'll make sure to share the slides and the recording in English and in French, hopefully in the coming days. So once again, thank you all for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to all engaging youth more meaningfully and intentionally, and adapting and trying some of your measurement and monitoring approaches in the own work that we're all doing. So thanks again.